every 6 months, I'm literally ready to burn down the Matt Report. Like, I just go through these phases where, it's like you get thousands of listens every episode. Do you just want to walk away from it? And it's like, sometimes, yeah.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 153 of How I Built It. Today, I'm talking to my good friend, Matt Medeiros. We both share a passion for podcasting and content creation in general. On top of talking about getting involved in local businesses and legacy, we dig deep into putting content out into the world. Now, a couple of weeks ago, you heard from Jessica Lawler and how to come up with a good content strategy. Well, in this episode, we'll learn more about one of the big important mediums for creating content in 2020, and that's podcasting. And let me tell you, there is nobody better to talk to than Matt about podcasting. So let's get into all of that in a minute. But first, I want to talk to you about my website, creatorcourses.com. So this year on the podcast, you might have noticed so far that we're focusing very heavily on freelancers and small business owners. We talked about niching down with Jason Resnick. We talked about creating a content strategy, and we even got some really good advice from other freelancers, things they wish they knew when they started their business. Well, creatorcourses.com is a place where I teach freelancers and small business owners how to build websites without code. So if you want to find good, well-made, clear courses that teach you how to build websites, that is a great place to do it. The courses are focused on everything from basic WordPress right up through some HTML and CSS, but you'll learn all about building beautiful web pages with Beaver Builder and things like that. And I developed the courses myself. If you're a regular listener, you know that I'm a web developer with, at this point, multiple decades of experience working on everything from small blogs to websites for Fortune 100 companies like Disney. I'm also an instructional designer. I've created courses for LinkedIn Learning and Session College and the University of Scranton. So the courses are great and super focused. There is also an amazing community of members that get access to forums and Slack, and I'm doing monthly office hours where we get together and people can ask me whatever questions they have if you are a member. So become a Creator Courses member today. Join the fantastic community of learners. Learn some new skills. I am aiming to either add a new course or update a course every quarter. And exclusively for listeners like you, you can save 15% on all memberships, including the lifetime membership, over at creatorcourses.com/build. That's creatorcourses.com/BUILD. Check it out today. Thanks so much. Now, let's get on with the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of How I Built It, the podcast that asks, how did you build that? Today, my guest is a good friend of mine and a repeat offender here on the How I Built It podcast, Matt Medeiros. He is now sales over at Pagely. He is still the host of the Matt Report, and he is the host of a relatively new podcast called We Are Here over at southcoast.fm. Matt, how are you?
Joe, it's always a pleasure to grace the airwaves with you. You're a former co-host of, we are former co-hosts in a different life.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Back before you were at Pagely, we were doing, was it a weekly or bi-weekly show?
It was whenever I had time. Really.
Yes.
It's called Plugged In Radio on plugintut.com.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad to be back on the airwaves with you. Sports-wise, life is drastically different. You guys have won, your Red Sox have won a World Series since we last were on the show together. The Giants are terrible, but the Yankees just picked up Garrett Cole for an obscene amount of money. So I'm excited about 2020.
I'm still crying over the Patriots' loss from last Sunday. So
I was at the Eagles game. As we record this, the Eagles had played the Giants on Monday, and I was at that game. And I wish the game ended after the first half.
You and many others.
Yeah. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about specifically kind of building your brand and your reach through podcasting, which, Matt, I feel like you've done exceptionally well, especially in the general kind of WordPress space where we operate a lot. So maybe we could start off a little bit with who you are and what you're doing these days.
Yeah, so I do in the WordPress space anyway. MattReport.com is where I do all of my open thinking, for better or for worse, on a podcast and a blog over there. Been doing it now for, going on 8 years. And I was really thinking back to just a lot of the stuff that I've done, both video and audio in the WordPress space. I've never counted the episodes, but it's probably somewhere north of 500 audio episodes and maybe 500-ish videos, all about WordPress. And more recently, as in last year, started a local podcast for local entrepreneurship. I'm about an hour south of Boston. It's called the South Coast of Massachusetts. And, doing the same thing, highlighting entrepreneurs in my South Coast region. And it's a totally different animal, like comparing, traditional internet podcast versus local podcasts. But we can maybe chat about that stuff today. And then, of course, selling over at Pagely.com.
Yeah, that's so I definitely do want to talk about that because, well, first of all, for the Matt Report, you pump out, I feel like tons of really good content, especially your videos are really thoughtful, very shareable. I feel like you're really good at that. How do you come up with that content? Is it just whatever? Are you just such a good thinker and then you record those thoughts, or do you have a list of content you want to cover?
So this is my biggest challenge. And it's one of the challenges I am really trying to focus on 2020 is to actually have a content calendar and have a process and have a purpose. The purpose for the last 7 years, Joe, has just been to talk out loud, to meet people, to have conversations. And when I say better for worse, there are some things I say that people don't agree with, that they don't like, and it sort of affects me. And then there's things that people attach to and latch onto. But I do this simply, on the WordPress side and the business side, I do it because I simply love WordPress and I simply love building businesses and seeing things form out of nothing. And my whole, like you said, I create a ton of content. I create the audio stuff. I do video stuff for Matt Report, which is critical thinking pieces. And then I do tutorials still on the Plug and Touch channel, which are more just here's how you use something in WordPress. And all of these things come up as they just pop into my head and I just do them. The South Coast.fm podcast, I'm using that as my sort of my lab, my experiment to map things out. And for that show, I actually do have things mapped out because I have such limited time that if I didn't have a plan for that show, I would never get to it. I would never get things done. And I'm actually using it and finding new processes over there and saying, you know what? I'm going to apply what I've learned doing that stuff over there, which is 101 level stuff. And I'm going to bring it to the Matt Report in 2020 just to give myself some kind of runway, some kind of breathing room.
That's great. Yeah, because I'm sure, the Matt Report is a bunch of years old now. So I'm sure with the South Coast.fm, it's slightly lower pressure. So you can experiment a little bit more. I'm experimenting with this podcast, my main podcast in 2020, and I'm really nervous about it. But I think that ultimately it'll change for the better. Yeah.
I am the, go against the grain when you consult with customers, even if you people are hey, how do I start a podcast? I'm if you don't have a plan, you're going to fail. If you fail to plan to fail, that kind of thing, however that saying goes.
Yeah.
I am a product of that, to my own, detriment when it comes to content creation. Cause I said, there's the creative side where I like creating things. The most recent episode of the Matt Report was just a solo episode, right? And it was just me talking to the microphone, no other interviewer or interviewee. And you get that sort of imposter syndrome kicks in and you're Jesus, anybody want to listen to this? But I'm just doing it. I'm doing it on the whim because I just feel I want to create this. I want to get it out. And then the byproduct is, an audience. But it's about me being able to have a creative outlet first with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll link to this in the show notes. The episode that you're referencing came out on the 10th of December, Missing WP Weekly Podcast, Yostgate, and 2020 Plans. It's like a 40-minute episode. Do you script that or have an outline, or do you just kind of like rap?
I just rap. I just have the ideas. Like, I don't know about you, Joe, but I am constantly thinking, as one does throughout the day as they're awake. But it's just like I have these thoughts and like something sparks it. And it's sort of like, I know I don't have another guest coming for another couple of weeks that's scheduled for the Matt Report. And I know I need to get content out. And I just don't want to do the same old thing. Like, I always change things. And I don't know if this is good or bad. Like, I always change things. I always change the format of the show. And I change the intro of the show. I don't have the same process every single time, for better or for worse. But I know, like, after a while, I have to change it. So I could do 12 episodes the same way, but I know I'm going to need to change it again. As much as people might hate Kanye West, when you think about the different changes he has gone through in just the music content anyway, not life or spiritual, whatever. You can see why, or any artist, right? You can see why they go through ups and downs. And I have really become, I was afraid to call myself an artist 3 years ago, but I've actually learned to embrace it now. And that's sort of how I perceive myself with content and video production, even if it's not high level compared to the next person. This is my journey. This is my path. And hopefully I get better, 10 years from now, hopefully it's much better.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, calling yourself an artist. Because getting on the mic in front of the camera, not in front of the camera, you are performing to some extent, right? People ask me, how do you get so comfortable in front of a microphone? And I say, I did drama club through grammar school and high school. So I was very comfortable in front of people, and it's just getting your reps in. But, you have to be on.
This is the interesting thing with the local show versus what I'll call the internet show, the Matt Report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I first started, I was like, okay, I'm just going to take all of the concepts that I normally do with the Matt Report, send them a Calendly link, set up a Zoom chat, share a Google Doc with them, like get into the paces of that. And that literally fell flat on its face with my first guest. Because these are small business owners who are not accustomed to podcasts. Very few of them actually listen to podcasts. And they're certainly not being interviewed by podcasters because they're not doing business on the web. There's nobody else in my area doing what I'm doing like I'm doing it. And I remember like the first day I sent her the first guest, and she ran the company's called Boutique Fitness, and she has a bunch of like fitness places. And I sent it to her, and she was like, okay, what's Zoom? And she was trying to install it. And she's like, I don't know if I can set this up. She's like, I use Skype. So I'm like, all right, forget it. We'll use Skype. And then we finally get connected. And all I hear, Joe, is screaming in the background when we first connect. And I'm like, where are you right now? She's like, oh, I'm at the studio. There's a cycling class going on. And I'm like, no, this is not going to work for a podcast. I need you to be in some quiet area. So we had to reschedule, and then she had to do it from home. And then she was using the Apple earbuds. And then the audio was terrible. So I started like relearning how to podcast when it came to the local market. And now the reason why I'm being so much more determined is the only word that comes to my mind right now, organized with that channel, is because now I record at a local co-working space. They have a sound booth set up, and I'm sort of like the in-house podcaster. Nice. So now I'm meeting people in person to do these shows. And to get back to your point about being comfortable in person, there are people who are now that I'm meeting in person in front of me with a microphone in front of them, and they're having the same anxiety. Like, I don't even know how to talk into this thing. Like, you got to get up really close to the microphone. Like, don't sit way back. Like, eat the microphone, and just going through those paces all over again.
Wow, that's super interesting. So let's talk a bit more about that, right? You kind of made your bones with the Matt Report. And then you started a more local podcast. Can you tell me first why you did that, and then how you feel it's kind of. So I don't want to make it seem like there is like you only did it for a benefit, but I'm sure there probably is some benefit. So maybe you could talk about the why you started it and then the kind of benefits you're seeing from it personally or in your own business.
So, hours south from Boston, 15 minutes from Providence, 3 hours away from New York. There is no huge like tech scene here. There's pockets of few people that I know who do a lot of tech and a lot of like modernized entrepreneurship stuff, like doing things on the web. But there's a local nonprofit that came in called E4All, and they're an accelerator. And they're an accelerator for companies who want to start sustainable businesses with community impact. So, are these businesses tech giants? No. Are they somebody who wants to start up a bakery for paleo-focused customers? Yeah. But these are people who want to learn how to do a business. And with the presence of E4All, I started meeting way more entrepreneurs in my local market, to the tune of like 50 or 60 people who apply every cohort. So it really clicked there and said, hey, there's inventory for me to interview. There's people out there for me to interview. And look, the real reason why I do this is because, Joe, the Matt Report doesn't get me good tickets to a local theater show. It doesn't get me the best seat at the best restaurant in my local area. What is the Matt Report to my kids now that I have 3 young sons? And, I grew up in a family business, grew up in a car dealership, started an agency with my father. Being able to have some kind of legacy to pass on to my kids, as crazy as a podcast sounds, I hope that it allows me to open up doors in the future for my children. Making connections with people in my local market that one day might be able to hire my sons.
Yeah, right.
Give them opportunity and connections that, quite simply, the Matt Report would never do other than just, paying the bills.
Yeah. Wow, what a poignant answer, and not one that I was expecting. But I think that's incredible, and it falls in line with kind of the main topic of this show, right? Which is how your podcast can help you grow your business or your brand or just your connection to the community. I wrote down in my notebook 2 days ago, one of my goals for 2020 was to go to more local events, right? I'm living outside of Philadelphia now. I grew up in New York, and other than like the sports thing, I'm pretty happy here. I definitely miss New York sports, but I don't have a lot of friends here. And my wife worries about that sometimes. She's like, do you want to go out and hang out with? And I'm like, hang out with who? But I know that there's a good WordPress community here. There's a lot of local meetups. I'm close, I'm less than an hour driving to the city, to Philly. And I want to be more involved locally in the community. So I think that's a really good answer. That
I see a lot of people, not to interrupt, but I see a lot of people who are, getting back into the agency game or getting into the ebook game or product game, digital game, whatever it is, which was fine, I'm not saying it's not fine. It was fine 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. And it was actually easier 10 years ago. But the reason why it was easier 10 years ago is because when you went out to your local market, people look at you cross-eyed when you said, well, you need a website, you need a social presence, you need digital, you need email, you need a podcast, you need YouTube. Now, the quote-unquote local markets, these small little, outside of the major metropolitan areas, they're getting much more conditioned to digital. Like, think about it. Like, you could actually start a digital online learning course, well, like you have, Joe, and you could go out and sell that locally because now people actually understand that they can go to a website, log into a website, give Joe their credit card to buy digital information that they can consume. And guess what? You forge the trust because you met them in person, versus them clicking on some Facebook ad that put them into a funnel, that put them into a 12 email drip, and then they finally bought from you. And you could potentially charge more money for it because they know you.
Yeah. Wow.
Might not be the avenue you want to go into, but the point is what I've seen with small businesses, again, is the shift in They finally get it now. They finally trust that they can buy a service, a done-for-you service, a digital course, from somebody in person, but the experience is done through their website. Like the connection is made now, which is something that you didn't really experience 5 years ago. And Clint Warren, God rest his soul, really opened my eyes up to that 5 years ago when I first met him, when he was selling WordPress education seminars in person. And he's like, people are paying me, $400 a ticket to come to this weekend workshop. And it's just starting to all fire. All cylinders are firing now. And, here we are, 5 years later, and it's, no more the truth.
Yeah, I think that's just a fantastic point that you touched on there, right? Because in order to sell, especially digital courses, right, or a lot of digital products, people need to know, like, and trust you. Getting somebody to know you on the internet is hard because they're not getting that FaceTime with you. With a podcast, it's a lot easier because podcasts are very personal, but there's still not that face-to-face interaction. And what you said made me think, there's a co-working space that is not quite walking distance from my house, but we'll say biking distance, right? Less than maybe like 2 miles away. So I just told people how far I'm willing to walk for something. And I love co-working spaces, but I constantly wonder about the value. Do I really want to pay $300 a month to have a desk once a week or something like that? It's like, but when you said it there, right? Maybe being part of that co-working space gets me 1 or 5 new students a month, or puts me in connection with people who might want to hire me for my new done-for-you podcasting service, and then it pays for itself for a year. So,
absolutely.
So I think that's a really good point that you made. Local agencies are getting much more acclimated to digital, and now you can make the connection in person to sell your digital products.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I made a lot of, again, probably just like you, co-working space was not ever a thing that existed 5 years ago in my area. It did up in Boston, in Providence, but here we are just short distances away, and it didn't exist. And when I remember because I've befriended both folks who started co-working spaces when they first started it, same thing. When they started their co-working spaces, people were like, I don't even understand. People work in an office all together. It doesn't even make sense. Don't you need to go to a job and punch in?
Yeah.
And now, those relationships that I forged, were able to, I was able to meet tons of people in that accelerator program, customers, so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's great. I was a founding member of Colework, a Scranton co-working space, but really, aside from the founding members, nobody was really interested in it five years ago or so. So, but now they are a much bigger thing. So, I think that's really great. This episode is brought to you by FreshBooks. Do you remember when you started your small business? It was no small feat. It took lots of late nights, early mornings, and the occasional all-nighter. Bottom line, you've been insanely busy ever since. So why not make things easier? Well, my friends at FreshBooks have the solution. FreshBooks invoicing and accounting software is designed specifically for small business owners. It's simple, intuitive, and keeps you way more organized than a dusty shoebox filled with crumbled receipts. As a side note, I actually told my accountant the first time that I used the shoebox method, and his face turned white. But in actuality, FreshBooks was one of the first things I bought when I started my business. I've been a FreshBooks user since 2009. It's easily the best accounting and invoice software for small business owners like us. Create and send professional-looking invoices in 30 seconds, and then get them paid 2 times faster with automated online payments. Nothing is better than sending out an invoice and getting it paid in the same day. That's happened for me with FreshBooks. You can also file expenses even quicker and keep them perfectly organized for tax time. And the best part is that FreshBooks grows alongside your business. So you'll always have the tools you need when you need them, without ever having to learn the ins and outs of accounting. Now, there are a lot of features on this list I have here to talk about, but I'm going to pick 2 of my favorites. The first is late payment reminders. They are clutch. It's one less thing that I need to worry about when making sure I get paid. I don't have to keep track of exactly when I sent the invoice, and if I already sent a follow-up email, or whether or not they viewed the email. All of that is taken care of inside FreshBooks. The other feature I really like is the automated expenses. I connect my business credit card to FreshBooks, and my expenses automatically get imported. They are all there, ready for me and my accountant to review. It makes tax time easier for both of us. And it's no secret that I love automation, and these two features make my life a lot easier. After doing things by hand, FreshBooks is worth the price of admission just for those two things. So join the 24 million people who have used FreshBooks. You can try it for 30 days for free. No catch, no credit card required. Go to freshbooks.com/builtit and enter how I built it in the How Did You Hear About Us section to get started. That's freshbooks.com/builtit. That's built with a T. Thanks so much to FreshBooks for supporting the show. And now let's get back to it. So as we kind of enter the back third of this episode, we've talked a little bit about your background and starting a local podcast and how valuable it could be. But as I just said, starting a podcast is a lot more personal than, say, blogging, right? Because you are in someone's ear. Have you found a benefit to that? Do people feel like they know you a little better, or they trust you a little more because they listen to your podcast?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, just from the Matt Report side, and I'm sure this has happened to you, is, it's been a while since I've gone to a word camp, but I know going to word camps, and there's always that awkward moment in the bathroom, right? Like, hey, I listen to you all the time. It's like, hey man, did you wash your hands first before we go shaking hands here in the bathroom?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, certainly people do. And Joe, like an artist, every 6 months, I'm literally ready to burn down the Matt Report. Like, I just go through these phases where, it's like you get thousands of listens every episode. Do you just want to walk away from it? And it's like, sometimes, yeah. Like sometimes I feel like this mental reset is something that I always want to do. But sure enough, somebody will always send something to me and say, hey, really great episode. It really helped me out. Other people will launch podcasts and be like, I'm doing this because of you. And that, that's great. And those are the things that, constantly keep me moving. On the local side, it happened even faster. I mean, I launched the first 2 or 3 episodes and I was at my local coffee shop and somebody was like, hey, you're the guy that does that podcast. So I was like, who the hell knows about the Matt Report around here? So I was like, yeah, the Matt Report. And they were like, no, the We Are Here podcast on South Coast. I'm like, how did that even happen? I've been out of the gate for like 2 episodes. But the thing is again, the local market, when you're in a market that's new and this stuff looks, just insurmountable to some people. How do you even get a podcast on the internet?
Right.
People are like, wow, this is something special. And again, when you're looking for opportunity, I think local is definitely a new place to look because people would call me the WordPress guy just because they knew about the podcast. They didn't really listen to it. They just knew like, oh, he's the WordPress. Mm-hmm. If you have any questions about WordPress, you talk to Matt. And now I quickly have become the podcast guy, for the local market. And they only know of like a dozen episodes that I've done. So it's quite interesting.
Wow. That's incredible. That's making me think, how can I look local? And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because people now are looking for more personalized stuff. They want things that are relatable to them. And with the digital market, especially the WordPress space, like it's getting pretty saturated. Or like podcasts with white guys talking about technology has been saturated. But it's cool that somebody's talking about the South Coast of I almost said Boston, but it's not Boston.
South Coast, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So here's like another like tactical insight thing. And again, this has nothing to do with me being smart. It's just me in a new market, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. I do the same thing, you and I, we get these contact forms come to our website. Hey, I'd love to guest post on your blog.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to include you in the top 20 influencers list. You get these things over and over again, and you're just like, yeah, delete, yeah, spam.
Yeah.
But I did a blog post, again, like thinking about SEO and search and growing the audience of the We Are Here podcast, I did a blog post on, what we would do in the traditional world of top 5 themes to use for WordPress. I did the top 5 co-working spaces on the South Coast because there's literally only 5. And I wrote the post up, included the images, the links, and then I emailed and Facebook messaged all 5 of them, did a little, audio snippet on it. And they were like, this is awesome. No one else is doing this for us, right?
Yeah.
And they all shared it to their Facebook pages. They all included it in their email newsletter. I got more subscribers to my newsletter, to my podcast. And that's happens every day in the internet world. But that's 1 out of 1,000, right? That you're actually going to get that kind of response. I turned to 5 businesses and 100% of them said, yes, I'm going to share this. Yes, I'm going to include this in my newsletter because no one else is doing it for that market. Wow. And to them, it was new and it was awesome. And to us on the internet, it's just another one.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Matt, you're giving me a lot of things to think about. But
that's why I'm here, Joe.
Yeah, right. This is why I have you on the show. It's just for me personally. But again, you said something that made me think of another analogous thing to kind of the burden of knowledge of people who do business on the internet, right? And that's pop-ups, like the opt-ins. Everybody I talk to is like, I hate those things. Like, why do they even exist? And I have to remind them, they exist because they work. Because for people who don't make websites, it's not an annoyance. It's a thing that they may or may not be interested in. So I always think about that. Or the people who say WordPress is easy, right? WordPress is not easy. Which is why there's a very big education industry around WordPress. So I really love that. Let's wrap up here with, if somebody wants to start a podcast, we'll say, right? Because you're going to be kind of a 3-episode set in season 8, where we kind of talk about podcasting. If somebody wants to start a podcast, what are the things that perhaps they should think about, the topics they should do? I'll cover gear in a separate episode, but if you want to talk about your gear, I'm always interested in what you're using. Maybe just the top 3 tips.
Top 3 tips is always the most hated response that I give is have a goal. Have a goal. Don't just go at this without, because it's fun for the first 10 episodes, Joe, as you and I both know. And then once you get to episode 20, 25, 30, you're like, this sucks. I don't want to do this. You had this great idea because you're like, I can't wait to talk to these 3 people. And then you talk to those 3 people and you're like, now what do I do? Mm-hmm. And so have a goal and start small, right? So I haven't been to the gym in 6 months since I've had my 3rd kid. I have some weight training bands right here, and I'm doing tiny little exercises every hour, just trying to get myself acclimated back into wanting to work out again. So have tiny goals. 10 email subscribers on a MailChimp list. That's a great one. Start with that. Can you get 10 email subscribers by 10 episodes? Please, God, yes. Right?
Yeah.
Number 2 is have some kind of, seasonality to it. Have some kind of differentiator to it. You don't have to. I totally get it if you're just trying to get the training wheels on and figure things out. But set some, end dates for yourself. Say, I'm going to do 6 episodes. I'm going to do 12 episodes. Whatever it is, because you want to be able to have that mental reset. You want to afford yourself that mental reset so that you can say, I'm going to do the story arc on 10 episodes, whatever. Give yourself some breathing room because that's one that usually creeps up on people. And number 3 is I wouldn't, Joe's going to do the hardware stuff. I wouldn't go crazy with it. Because again, Joe and I both know the black hole that is tech, podcasting, tech hardware and stuff like that and software. You don't have to go crazy. And you just want to be able to tell your story. A lot of people, this is sort of a 4th one right here, is a lot of people say, well, I've got nothing to say. Who wants to listen to me? Well, that's not the question to me. The question is not, who will be my audience? The question is, what will you do with an audience once you have one? Because that's where things get tripped up. All of a sudden, you're talking about, the Baking Mommy is a friend of mine who started a podcast. That's her name of her site. And she just makes like cakes and cupcakes and stuff like that. She started a podcast, same thing. I don't know who I'm going to talk to. And all of a sudden, she got 50 or so people listening to her every time she releases a podcast. Now she's saying, what do I do with this audience?
Yeah.
How do I make this work for my business? And those are the questions that you should be leading with, not, who will be my audience, but what will you do with them once you get them? Because if you're putting your voice out there consistently enough, people will follow you, they will attach to you, they'll share you, and they want to listen to you. You just got to figure out what you want to do with them once you get them, because you don't want to disappoint them. You don't want to let them down.
Yeah, I love that. I wish I had that advice when I started my podcast, because I just kind of did it on, not a whim. I had a goal in mind, and then it quickly outgrew what that goal would have been. So I'm hopefully by this point in season 8, you can tell I'm being a bit more intentional. But that is fantastic advice. Have a goal. I will link to the book, Start With Why. I think that's an excellent, there are some excellent prompts there to get you thinking about what your goal could be. Have some seasonality to your show. I love that too. Again, that reset, that break at I have 2 seasons per year, essentially. I think you probably do something similar, right, Matt?
Roughly that, yeah.
Yeah. Where I take about a month off in between them. And then don't go crazy with the hardware stuff, for sure. I do, because I'm a nerd. But I mean, Matt, you are using the beginner microphone that I recommend for most people, right? The ATR 2100. And you sound great. So it's, I'll link to the last episode of season 7 too, where I interviewed Ryan White from Rode, where he kind of talks about have a budget. It's more about like your environment than buying the best possible microphone.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Matt, I appreciate your time, but I do need to ask you my favorite question. You gave us so much good advice already, but do you have any trade secrets for us?
Trade secrets. Your trade secret is confidence. That's my trade secret. Confidence, telling your story, not being ashamed of, embracing who you are, where you came from. I mean, I'm an ex car salesman, grew up in the car sales business industry, started a digital agency, started podcasting. And confidence is what has really kept me through all of that. And, in terms of the WordPress world specifically, it's not being afraid of voicing your opinion, sharing it, so long as you're thoughtful about it and, you're willing to have healthy conversations with people. Always tell your story. Always be confident about it. That's what I got.
I love that. It's just a fantastic way to kind of wrap up the show there. So I appreciate your time. If people want to learn more, where can they find you?
mattreport.com and pagely.com. And if you're in my local area, if you want to listen to that local podcast, it's southcoast.fm.
All right. I will link to all of that, as well as a bunch of other stuff we talked about in the show notes for this episode over at How I Built It. Matt, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Joe, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much to Matt for joining us this week. It is always a pleasure talking to him. Like I said during the interview, it seems like he just thinks about these things all the time. He always has such well-formed opinions. But what I really, really liked from this episode, there were a couple of things I really liked. The first was how he talks about starting his local podcast and bringing podcasting to an area that's not generally tech savvy. I think that's brilliant. I very nearly started a local podcast the day that we recorded, and I'm still noodling on that a little bit, but just such amazing advice there. And then, of course, he has a few really great tips for us. Can you get 10 email subscribers? You probably can. There's I will link in the show notes to ConvertKit. You can set up a free landing page and start gathering email addresses for free. I'm going to talk to Angel Marie of ConvertKit later in this season, but see if you can. And if you do, maybe it's worth sending some emails to. So I love that goal. Have some seasonality to your show. I do that the same here. Don't go crazy with the hardware. Just lots of really, really great advice. And next week, we'll be talking more about podcasting. It's going to be me on the mic talking about should you even start a podcast? And we'll try to help you answer that question. For all of the things that we talked about over on the show notes, head over to howibuilt.it/153. Thanks so much to our sponsors, Creator Courses and FreshBooks. I love having FreshBooks as a sponsor. They're so great. I am using them. I'm getting my taxes together now, and FreshBooks has been extremely helpful with that. So definitely, if you do nothing else, just check out FreshBooks, but really do everything we talked about, or at least pick your favorite 3 things. I really loved this episode. Now, the rest of the stuff I'm going to ask you to do, totally optional. If you like this episode, please subscribe, give us a like or a rating and a review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That really helps people discover the show. If you are interested in Creator Courses or just learning more about some of the tools that you can dig deeper in over at Creator Courses, you can check out our free 5 fast tools to help you build websites PDF over at howibuilt.it/tools. And I know that's a lot. There's a lot of information here. It was a rich episode. Again, all of the show notes are over at howibuilt.it/153. And until next time, get out there and build something.